Chapter 1. Leaving Seattle. The house was too quiet to stay in. That was the truth underneath all the other truths. The one Nora Brennan had been circling for 11 weeks without once landing on it. She could dress it up however she liked. She was taking a writing retreat. She was revisiting the coast of her childhood. She was finally, at 63, going to do the thing she had told herself for 40 years she would do someday, which was to sit somewhere beautiful with a notebook and find out whether there was a book in her after all. All of that was true enough to say out loud to the neighbors. But to be truthful, none of it was the reason. The reason was the silence, and the way it had a shape now. She had started, in the last month, to think of it as a thing rather than an absence, which she suspected was not entirely healthy and which helped anyway. If she could give it a shape, she could look at it, and a thing you can look at is a thing you are no longer simply inside of. So, she gave it a shape. It pooled in the empty half of the bed. It sat in the second coffee mug she kept reaching for and then not making. It filled the passenger seat of every car she had ever owned, and it would have filled the passenger seat of the Marigold too if she had let it, so she did not let it. She put her thermos there instead, wedged upright against a folded rain jacket and her laptop. Then she told the silence it could ride in the back with the rest of the things she was no longer using. The piano was one of those things. It stood against the far wall of the front room where it had stood for 30 years, under a runner and a dead fern and a stack of mail she had been meaning to sort. Patrick had wanted it to be gone in the settlement and then, when it came to it, had not wanted the trouble of moving it, so it stayed, the way the ring had stayed, the way she herself had stayed too long in a good many rooms. She went to it on her last morning without quite deciding to. She lifted the runner and the fern and put back the lid, and she stood there in the too quiet house and pressed one key, a low one, and let it sound the all of the way down the hall and out into nothing. She had been a girl who played. That was a thing almost no one who knew her now would have guessed, because it belonged to a Nora from before the license and the long, careful years of watching other people's lives, before Patrick, before all of it. But there had been a time, small and bright, and a very long way back, when the first thing that ever moved through her had moved through her hands on a keyboard, when she would sit down cross and 13 and get up an hour later, not knowing where the hour had gone, emptied out and clean, having poured whatever she was into something that could hold it. Nobody had taught her that this was rare. She had thought everyone had a channel like that, a place the self ran through and came out the other side, as something you could stand to live with. She had not played in years. The channel had silted up so slowly, she never marked the day it closed. She only knew that she had needed, all her life, somewhere for the current to go, and that when the piano fell quiet, the current had not stopped. It had simply gone looking for another channel to run in. It had found the work. That was the truth. She was only now in an empty house, letting herself see plainly. The noticing, the reading of a room, the slow patient assembly of a stranger's real story out of the small things they let slip. That had been the second channel. It had the same shape as the music, exactly the same, the losing of the hour, the emptying out, the pouring of herself into something that held. For 40 years it had run clean, and she had told herself it was only a job. She closed the lid on the piano gently and went to finish loading the bus, and did not let herself feel the size of the thought that had come with her hand still on the key, which was this, that she had spent a whole life needing a channel for the current and had just watched the last one run dry. She had the packing down to a system because she had everything down to a system. That was the trouble with a working life spent noticing how other people did things badly. You ended up unable to do anything carelessly yourself. The cooler went behind the driver's seat where she could reach it. The bedding went up top. The camera, an old digital body she trusted more than her phone, went in the canvas bag on the engine cover beside the field notebook, because a camera you cannot reach in 4 seconds is a camera you will wish you had not packed so neatly. The notebook was new, the latest in a line of them going back longer than some of her former clients had been alive. Stiff cover, unbroken spine, every page still blank and full of nothing. She liked them best this way, and she liked them least this way, both at once. The last thing was the ring. She had not planned to bring it. She had planned, in fact, a small ceremony of not bringing it, in which she left it in the drawer of the hall table where it had been living since the spring, and walked out, and did not look back, and felt free. She got as far as the door. Then she went back, and opened the drawer, and stood a while in the quiet hall with the band cold in her palm, and in the end, she did the only thing that felt honest. She carried it out to the bus and put it in the glove box, under the registration and the spare fuses and the little flashlight, where she would not see it and would always know exactly where it was. That was where she put things she was not finished with. It was the most truthful thing she did all morning, and she was glad there was no one there to watch her do it. Then she got in and pulled the door shut with the particular heavy thunk that was the Marigold's whole argument for existing, and sat a moment with her hands on the big thin wheel. The bus had come to her the year the piano went quiet, though she had never once until this exact morning set the two events side by side. She had bought it half-wrecked from a man in Ballard for less than it was worth and spent 2 years and more money than she would admit bringing it back, and Patrick had called it a money pit and a death trap and a midlife crisis on 4 wheels. What he had never understood, what she had not entirely understood herself, was that the Marigold was not a car. It was the same thing the piano had been. It was a vessel you could pour yourself into and come out the other side lighter. You climbed in and the hour went somewhere and you did not notice it go. She had painted it, in the end, the exact butter gold of a thing that has decided to be cheerful no matter what the weather is doing, and it had never once left her stranded in 30 years, which was a record her marriage had not managed to match. She had not said that last part out loud, ever. She thought it now, and was a little ashamed of how good it felt, and turned the key. The engine caught on the first try the way it always did. "All right," she said, to the bus, or the silence in the back, or the version of herself who used to lose an hour at a keyboard. "Let us go and find out." And Nora Brennan pulled away from a house that was too quiet to stay in and pointed herself south. The freeway out of the city was its own kind of grief, all the exits she used to take for reasons that no longer existed. The dry cleaner, the good Thai place, the office of the agency she had given her best years to, where her name had never once gone on a door. She let that exit pass with the rest, and did not, this time, look away from what it stirred. Because that was the real name of the fear if she was going to be truthful, and she had a whole coast in which to be truthful. It was not loneliness, though she was lonely. It was not even the divorce exactly, which had been less a rupture than an erosion. The slow going of something she had stopped noticing was going until it was gone. The fear was older than Patrick, and it went deeper than the empty seat, and the retirement had only made it plain, the way low tide makes plain the shape of what has been under the water all along. The fear was that she had been, her whole life, the one who saw and was never seen for seeing. She could line the proof of it up like mile markers. The embezzlement she had unwound in a single long weekend when 3 men with better titles had spent a year insisting there was nothing there, and the partner who had walked it into the client meeting as his own. The missing girl she had found by noticing which shoe was missing from a closet, a thing she had explained twice before anyone listened, and the detective whose name had gone in the paper. 40 years of finding the thread that everyone else had walked past, of handing it over, of watching someone else be believed for it. She had told herself it did not matter, that the work was the reward, that a quiet competence was its own kind of dignity. And it was. She believed that still. But quiet competence, poured out year after year into other people's credit, has a way of leaving a person thin, and Nora had woken up at 63 in a too-quiet house and understood that she had spent a lifetime being the current in someone else's river. Now the last river had dried, and she did not know whether there was anything left of her that ran on its own. That was the deep water under the whole bright trip. Not I am sad, not I am alone. But I was only ever remarkable in secret, and the secret is over. And without a case to point the eye at, I am just a sharp old woman in a yellow bus, becoming the kind of person other people are kind to and do not really see. Invisible. Dull. A woman who used to be something, poured out and never once acknowledged, driving south to a blank notebook to find out whether she could, for the first time in her life, write herself into her own story instead of everyone else's. She noticed she was gripping the wheel and made her hands ease. This was not a book about rage. She had never had much use for rage, which was loud and burned fast and left you nowhere. What she had was patience and the long, slow art of redirection, of finding where the blocked current might be let to run. She had a bus that was the heir to a piano. She had a notebook. She had 300 miles of coast. It would have to be enough, and she was going to find out whether it was. She stopped for gas somewhere south of Chehalis, at a station with a sun-faded awning, and stood with her hand on the cool flank of the bus and did the thing she always did at gas stations, which was read the place. The man at Pump 3 losing a fight on the phone, the two young people at Pump 1 who were not a couple, the woman in the parked sedan who was not waiting for anyone, who was simply sitting in the only quiet room she had. Nora knew that one. She had been driving 2 hours to outrun being that one. She caught herself doing it and laughed, alone at the pump in the watery light. The eye did not know the current had dried. It went on running the water through habit, reading strangers who would never know they had been read, and there was something almost unbearably tender in that. The channel still open and nothing left to send down it. She bought a bad coffee and a packet of the orange crackers with the peanut butter that she had loved as a child, and she ate them standing up, and for no reason she could name she thought of the camp. It came the way those things come, sideways and whole. The smell of canvas warming in the sun, the grit of the trench under her knees, the fog climbing out of the water in the evenings until the world was firelight and surf. She had been 19, and there had been a boy named Daniel with a laugh like a window thrown open, who once spent a whole afternoon teaching her the difference between a thing that was old and a thing that only looked old, and who had kissed her exactly once on a foggy cliff path in a summer that had ended badly enough that she had folded the whole of it away for 40 years. She had not let herself think about how it ended. She was not going to start at a gas station, but the beginning of it, the firelight part, the part before, sat warm in her chest, and it surprised her how much she had missed a thing she had worked so hard to forget. She put the rest of the crackers on the dash. She did not put them in the passenger seat. The passenger seat was occupied. A little past noon she came over a rise, and there, far off and flat and silver under the cloud, was the long line of the Columbia going out to meet the sea. Astoria sat at the mouth of it, hill-piled and weathered, its Victorian houses stacked up the slope like books on a crowded shelf, half of it already lost in the fog sliding in off the river. Somewhere down in those streets was a creaky old inn with her name on a reservation, and a first morning and a coast that ran south for 300 miles toward a town called Jacksonville, and a boy who had grown old somewhere she had not thought about in a lifetime. She did not know, coming down the hill, that the trip would give her back the thing she had come south without daring to hope for, which was not the boy and not the book, but the plain proof, gathered slowly and at some cost, that the eye still saw true, and that seeing was worth something after all. She only knew that the bus was warm and the rain was soft, and that for the first time in 11 weeks the silence in the back seat had gone quiet in a way that felt less like absence and more like room. "There it is," she said, and started down toward the water.